When Eduardo found out that his wife had run off with their youngest son, Ricardo, he was absolutely furious. Ricardo was just a young man, barely 25, and Eduardo knew he wasn't the one to blame. The real issue, as Eduardo saw it, was Elena, his wife. She had been manipulating Ricardo, filling his head with her schemes and even convincing him to take a large sum of money from the office. Hello and welcome to our channel. Today, we're diving into yet another chilling real-life event from around the world. This time, the story takes us to the city of Luang Prabang in Laos. While this case might seem simpler than some others, it's incredibly intriguing. It's all about the chaos and drama in someone else's marriage. Curious to know the full story? Stick around as we break it all down and explore the details. Let's dive in. Before we dive into the story, don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, and share this video with your friends. It helps us keep bringing you these incredible stories. Now, let's get into it. This story revolves around a man named Eduardo, born in December 1962 in Seri Sayafoan, Laos. In 1983, he married his wife and moved to Luang Prabang to start a new chapter. Eduardo became a father at just 20 years old, welcoming his first son, Benino. 12 years later, his second son, Ricardo, was born, creating quite an age gap between the brothers. Eduardo was always a clever businessman. He started out selling bags and clothes at the market, then expanded into a workshop and spare parts trade with a friend. Eventually, he ventured into buying and selling used cars, and by 2014, he owned his own dealership selling both new and used vehicles. Benino joined the family business to help his father, making it a true family venture. In 2017, Ricardo was about to finish college when he joined the dealership too. He originally wanted to work elsewhere, but his parents convinced him to stay. The business had grown significantly, with several employees, making it a stable option for Ricardo's future. So, he agreed and began learning the ropes from his father and brother. After graduating in February 2018, Ricardo decided it was time to take the next big step in his life. He proposed to his girlfriend of 3 years, Felicia. The two were a perfect match, and on May 8, 2018, they got married. Ricardo was 23, and Felicia was 25, slightly older than him. Felicia was everything a family could ask for: kind, caring, and an excellent cook. Eduardo and his wife adored her. But life took a heartbreaking turn on February 13, 2019, when Eduardo's wife passed away after a long illness. At the time, Felicia was 7 months pregnant, making the loss even harder on the family. Eduardo was devastated. The grief hit him so hard that he locked himself in his room for 3 weeks, unable to cope with the emptiness his wife had left behind. However, 2 months later, on May 20, 2019, joy returned to the family when Ricardo and Felicia welcomed their first child. The house came alive again, and Eduardo found new purpose as a proud grandfather. Ricardo and his family lived in Eduardo's house, while Benino, who was married by then, lived separately. Even with the company of his children and grandchild, Eduardo struggled with loneliness after his wife's passing. Something was missing, and he started spending his evenings at a local bar cafe to escape his grief. That's where a friend introduced him to Elena, a 28-year-old woman. Eduardo and Elena seemed to hit it off immediately. Their connection grew as they continued to meet at the bar for drinks and conversation. Elena had previously worked at the bar, but later left to help a friend run a salon. With some saved-up capital, she eventually started her own skincare business, operating both online and offline. Despite her new venture, Elena still liked to visit the bar whenever she had free time. And so, their friendship deepened, setting the stage for a new chapter in Eduardo's life, one that would change everything. 2 months after meeting Elena, Eduardo finally worked up the courage to bring her home and introduce her to his family. Ricardo didn't mind. He figured his dad deserved some happiness and wouldn't be lonely anymore. But Felicia, she wasn't having it. She believed Elena was only interested in Eduardo's money, especially since she knew Elena from the bar. Felicia couldn't stand seeing her father-in-law getting close to someone like that. She urged Ricardo to talk to his father and discourage the relationship, but Ricardo brushed it off, saying, "They're not serious. They'll probably break up anyway." In the following weeks, Eduardo and Elena spent a lot of time together. He often took her to the dealership to look around and even had her hanging out at the office with him from morning till evening. Benigno wasn't thrilled about it, but he kept quiet because it was clear their father was happier than he'd been in years. Eduardo seemed to have a new spark in his life. He was always smiling when Elena was around. Then, in early September 2019, Eduardo dropped a bombshell. He and Elena were getting married in less than 2 weeks. Benigno and his wife were furious but eventually came to terms with it, as long as their 40% stake in the dealership remained untouched. Felicia, however, was livid. She protested to Ricardo, but he shrugged it off, saying, "What can I do? Elena seems like a good person. And don't worry about the property. It's already secured for the kids in the future." On September 10, 2019, Eduardo and Elena tied the knot. After the wedding, Elena moved in with the family and even started helping out with the dealership's admin work. Now there were 2 admins, Ricardo and Elena. Felicia, already uneasy about the situation, grew even more jealous. She couldn't help but notice how close Ricardo and Elena seemed to be, even if their conversations were mostly about work. It still left her feeling anxious. Then, at the end of 2019, the dealership temporarily shut down due to the pandemic. With everyone spending more time at home, Ricardo and Elena grew even closer, which only added fuel to Felicia's suspicions. By New Year's Day, January 1, 2020, Felicia had had enough. She told Ricardo she wanted to move out of Eduardo's house, saying they needed their own space. After a long discussion, Ricardo finally agreed. By mid-January 2020, they moved into a small house about 8 kilometers away from his father's place. Felicia finally felt a sense of peace. But that peace didn't last long. 3 months later, Ricardo started coming home less and less. He always had excuses. There was water damage at the dealership, a customer complaint, piles of tax paperwork, or he was taking care of his sick father. Then, on March 7, 2020, Felicia got a WhatsApp message from her brother-in-law Benigno. He told her that Ricardo had withdrawn $12,000 from the dealership's account for personal use. When Felicia confronted Ricardo about it, he claimed he was setting up a special education fund for their 1-year-old son. 2 days later, Ricardo said he needed to head to work, but he never showed up at the dealership. Benigno called Felicia, and she was just as surprised. Worse, Ricardo's phone had been off for 24 hours. With Ricardo gone, Elena was left as the only admin at the dealership, and Felicia couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. The next day, Ricardo finally called his wife and brother Benigno to let them know he was out of town in Seongjun. He claimed he was working on a business deal with a friend. Both Felicia and Benigno were furious and demanded he come home immediately, but Ricardo reassured them he'd return as soon as his business was wrapped up. Later, Ricardo called his father, Eduardo, and spent a long time talking about this new business he was pursuing. At the end of the call, he asked Eduardo to transfer him $25,000 to help with his venture. Eduardo hesitated but eventually sent him half the amount. Ricardo then begged his father not to tell anyone, not his wife, not his brother, about the money, and Eduardo reluctantly agreed to keep it a secret. Over the next 2 weeks, Ricardo remained unreachable on his cell phone and never returned home. However, he made a point to call his father every couple of days from a landline, promising that he'd come back as soon as the business deal was done. Eduardo complied with his son's request, choosing to stay quiet about Ricardo's absence. 2 weeks turned into a month, then 2 months, and still, Ricardo didn't return or update his wife. By late May 2020, things took a strange turn when Elena suddenly called Eduardo, asking for a separation. She said she wanted to leave and go back home. Eduardo was shocked and pleaded with her to come over and talk things through in person, but Elena refused. Shortly after that call, her phone was permanently disconnected. Felicia, who had been desperately searching for Ricardo all this time, grew suspicious of Elena's abrupt decision to leave. Determined to get answers, she visited the bar where Elena used to work and managed to track down her old address. But when she arrived, she learned that Elena had recently moved. Fortunately, a former neighbor gave Felicia the new address, a nearby apartment complex. Felicia went straight to the apartment and showed a security guard a photo of her husband. His response was shocking. "Oh yes, Mr. Ricardo. He moved in here about a month ago with Ms. Elena. They're newlyweds. But I can't give you their unit number. You'll have to talk to the apartment manager." Unfortunately, the manager wasn't available, so Felicia had to leave, her heart shattered. She shared everything with Eduardo and Benigno, and they were livid. The next morning, on June 1, 2020, Eduardo and Felicia returned to the apartment, determined to confront Ricardo. This time, the manager was present, and Eduardo provided his ID to verify his relationship. The manager confirmed that Ricardo and Elena lived on the 4th floor. But when they called the unit, no one answered. Eduardo and Felicia went up together, only to find the apartment empty. Frustrated, Eduardo told Felicia to go home and wait. He promised there wouldn't be any trouble and that he'd handle it. Later that night, at 9 p.m., Eduardo returned to the apartment alone. This time, he avoided the front desk and took the fire escape up to the 4th floor, making sure no one saw him. When he reached Ricardo's unit, he rang the doorbell. Ricardo opened the door, and Eduardo barged in without hesitation. Inside, he found Elena. The two of them froze, saying nothing as Eduardo stared them down. Ricardo stammered an apology, but Eduardo wasn't interested in words. Without warning, Eduardo pulled a gun from his waistband and fired 3 shots into Elena's head. She collapsed instantly. Turning to his son, Eduardo punched him in the face before storming out of the apartment. He walked straight to the nearest police station and turned himself in. Meanwhile, paramedics arrived at the scene, but it was too late. Elena, just 29 years old, was pronounced dead on the spot. On the flip side, Mr. Eduardo was deeply upset with his wife, Elena. Over the 9 months of their marriage, he had discovered that Elena, who also worked at his dealership, had been secretly transferring money from the office account into her personal account. It wasn't a lot at once, just small amounts each week, but it added up over time. Despite knowing this, Eduardo allowed it to slide because he loved her. But when he found out that she had run away with his youngest son, Ricardo, his anger boiled over. Ricardo, who wasn't even 25 yet, was an innocent young man in Eduardo's eyes. He quickly realized that Elena had manipulated Ricardo, even convincing him to withdraw large sums of money from the dealership for her. Eduardo saw all of this as Elena's doing, and it was this betrayal that drove him to take drastic action against her. When Ricardo was later interviewed, his face was filled with regret. He admitted to marrying Elena, though only in a religious ceremony. From what I've read, their marriage wasn't legally recognized, which only complicated things further. As a result, Ricardo also faced legal consequences for his role in the situation. Eduardo's lawyer argued that the man shouldn't face harsh punishment but should instead receive treatment. They claimed his poor health and declining mental state were reasons for leniency. A medical report confirmed that Eduardo showed early signs of Alzheimer's, a condition that affects memory and cognitive abilities. Despite this, the prosecutor argued that the act was premeditated. After all, Eduardo had carried a legally registered firearm to the scene, suggesting he had planned everything in advance. The final verdict came on September 28, 2020. The court found Eduardo guilty of premeditated murder. He was sentenced to life in prison, but, due to his health condition, the sentence was reduced. He became eligible for parole after serving 15 years. As for Ricardo, he was charged for entering into an illegitimate marriage and misusing funds. The court sentenced him to 2 months in prison. Through it all, Ricardo's wife, Felicia, remained loyal and waited for him, eventually welcoming him back when his sentence was complete. What lessons can we learn from this story?